Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and I'm a Forbes contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing. We're excited today to have with us Jacob Allen, who is a partner at the Cicero Group. He's responsible for the social impact practice. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, the privilege is all ours, and we're grateful that you would make the time. You know, it's interesting to me. I just got to say, in our pre-interview you gave me some real, I thought, juicy sort of consumer-ready tidbits and tips and advice. And I thought it was interesting that they were at once so pithy, so media-ready, and on the other hand, also so important, so meaningful. I usually see things being one or the other. And you really bridged the gap. And so I'm excited to talk to you more about these three tips that you offered up. The first tip you offered was to do your homework. Why do you think that's important?
Well, again, first, thank you very much. And I appreciate the flattery, Devin. That's always nice and appreciated. The reason I focus first on do your homework is that in the social sector, I think that the motivating force, the thing that draws people into doing work in whatever way it is because they're passionate about it and they're excited about making a difference and they want to do something good in the world. And that's absolutely essential. And we should never lose sight of that or try to diminish that. But the downside of that sometimes in practice is that we kind of look before we leap in some cases. We see a problem with a few people or in a community, and we suppose that we have a solution or that just jumping in will actually change things. And so sometimes it's valuable to compare or pair those efforts of the heart, the passion that we have, with some pretty thoughtful ideas and doing some research, and essentially comparing your heart with your head. And I think there's real power in the combination of those two things. But sometimes we ignore the deliberate thinking, understanding what's at the root of the problems we're trying to address, questioning whether our solution is in fact a unique or best solution, or if there's more that we need to do.
A lot of your clients are big national nonprofits, and as you work with them, I couldn't help but wonder on this point if they don't have an advantage before they launch a new initiative. They have some wherewithal, some resources to figure out and develop a plan, a meaningful plan, and even a measurement strategy for a new initiative. If you were talking to a social entrepreneur, no resources to speak of, how do you coach them to achieve as much of the same kind of thing as possible when they probably can't afford to hire you for $50,000 or $100,000 to help them figure out how to have impact?
Yeah. So that's absolutely true, and unfortunately is that those with more resources, more of a foundation on which they can build, do have a little bit more leeway to invest in these kinds of things, do some upfront work. Having said that, I do actually work with a lot of other organizations, smaller organizations, local, domestic, and in fact, just this week, was meeting with 5 different people here in our local community, relatively small organizations. And the principles are still the same. And so while you may not spend or have the opportunity to spend 3 or 6 months hiring a team of consultants to do a fully developed research study and build a strategic plan, the same questions that they would follow over the course of those 6 months are things that anybody can ask themselves. And they are the questions that we've been talking about already and that were in that pre-interview of what is the success that I ultimately want to have in the world? Not just what will I provide or who will I train or what will I do, but rather what's the change I want to make, and in people's lives or in the community or in society or something. And what does it take to do that? How will I do that? And even if it's as simple as asking a few other people, whether they're experts or the people you're trying to serve, just asking around is a form of collecting data and doing your own research. And it may not be that you can conduct very significant studies that are conclusive and definitive and comprehensive, but just starting to that practice of asking those types of questions is very powerful. Just again, I mentioned I was talking with five leaders of organizations of this type just this week. And when I asked the group, okay, I want us to focus a little bit on who is it that you're trying to serve. Let's get very clear about who they are, what the challenges are that they face, et cetera. And what is the change in their lives or in the world that you'd like to accomplish for them? After some reflection and discussion, one woman who's been in the sector for a long time, is fairly prominent in the community, she kind of swallowed hard and said, it's a little embarrassing that I'm having such a hard time answering these questions. I've been doing this for a long time, and I should know these answers. And so it's frankly, there's a lot of power in knowing which questions to ask and taking a little bit of time to
I think it really is supremely helpful for us to be thinking about those kinds of questions as we launch into an effort to do some sort of social impact initiative. So I'm really glad you shared that. Now, your second tip was really an observation, but a powerful one, and that is that measurement improves impact. It doesn't just prove impact. And I thought that was a powerful insight.
Well, thank you. And it's sometimes measurement can be a daunting subject, especially for people who are really just worried about helping the person who's homeless or helping somebody get off of drug addiction or stay out of jail. So when you think about the complexities of how do I collect data, how do I make sure it's valid, how do I do the statistical analysis, measurement can get really complicated, and that can be off-putting to some people, understandably. But if you turn it around and say, frankly, all I really want to do is be better and make a difference and make sure that I'm making a difference more effectively, and then ask, what kind of information would help me do that? Then measurement becomes a little bit simpler. And so I've seen over and over and over again when organizations focus simply on doing one big massive study to tell them, did it work or did it not, right? Are we having an impact or are we not? That's valuable, but very infrequently do those big one-time studies that are in fact super rigorous fundamentally change the way the organization does its work. If they're good about it, they will, but more often than not, it doesn't. And rather, if you're thinking about measurement first and foremost as an input into helping us decide how to improve, that's where the power of measurement and bringing some data to bear to decision making and refinement can be very powerful.
I appreciate that. That's a great insight. And I think it's really powerful to think about the ways in which impact measurement actually can improve our impact, not just prove it, not just pithy, profound. Now, your final tip for us was that excellent execution is required, or as you put it, having a great program model and rigorous measurement are necessary, but not sufficient. Changing the world also requires excellent execution. Tell us more about that.
Well, thanks. At the end of the day, what we actually do and how well we do it in the social sector is what will make the difference. So it's all well and good to say, spend some time up front thinking hard and getting clear about what your strategy is and what you want to achieve and how you're going to go about that, and set up the data systems and the data collection, and that's all absolutely essential. So I'm not saying don't do that. But at the end of the day, we've got to go forward and make a difference. And that, in fact, is happening a lot, all the time. So whether you're working in sub-Saharan Africa or Haiti or on the streets of your own community, it is the frontline work that makes that difference. And the people who are doing that work, I found over and all are absolutely wonderful. They're committed, they're engaged, and they have a wealth of experience about how to be effective. But there are also other ways in which an organization that is going about these kinds of efforts needs to run and can run more effectively. And so I found that while frontline staff and workers are fully in, they're all in terms of what they're doing, sometimes they don't have the resources, they don't have the training, they struggle to communicate what's happening. And that's kind of back office operations, it's leadership, it's performance evaluations and training processes. it's all these things that aren't very exciting, especially in the social sector when you want all your money to go to the programs, to the kids you're helping or whatever. But it is absolutely essential because it can increase the capabilities and therefore the impact that each of those frontline people can have.
Well, yeah, this really raised an issue in my mind that I thought is interesting. And about 3 or 4 years ago, Dan Pallotta gave a rather famous TED Talk where he raised the issue of overhead, and with due respect to Dan, some of us in the space have felt like there was a little bit of sour grapes in his message because his nonprofit that had very high overhead and great impact was shut down, and effectively by donors. And but I think the conversation he started is a really important one. And I wonder, as you look at this as an unbiased expert in this space, how do you balance that tension between sort of fully funding a nonprofit's initiatives, including that overhead that provides that support and all, and also the tensions on the other side of waste and abuse? And of course, there was a recent case, CBS News has been sort of nonstop the last several months talking about the Wounded Warrior Project and the abuses there. What's your take on all of that?
Well, it's a fundamentally important issue, and Dan did a great job, I think, of poignantly conveying that in his TED Talk. But there have been many studies and articles written. Some former colleagues from the Bridgespan Group and I myself have written on this. Major foundations are making some significant changes, even from the Gates Foundation to the Ford Foundation and others, because of this very issue. To me, the solution of balancing that tension between waste and abuse, and then on the other hand, efficiency, comes down to those are the wrong things to be focused on first. Those are means to ends, or avoiding waste and increasing efficiency are means to ends. And the end is impact. So the question we ought to be asking and ought to be holding ourselves accountable for is, what impact am I having? And what is the cost per impact unit, if you will? How much does that impact cost? How can I increase or maintain impact while maintaining or decreasing the costs of doing that? Some cases that will mean spending less on salaries for frontline staff. In other cases, it will actually mean spending a little bit more on salaries to get better people who can do twice as good a job, or to spend a little bit more on a measurement system so that you know what is working and you can help inform those frontline staff's approaches. So it's a complicated issue. There is no super easy solution to it. But I guess my kind of mantra, or my soapbox on this issue would be simply both to funders of all stripes, the big foundations, the government funders, and the individual donors who are giving $20 a month, but also to the nonprofit organizations themselves. We kind of need to turn our mind and change how we're thinking about this. Saying we spend only 3% on overhead, frankly, means nothing. It doesn't mean that I'm making a difference, and it doesn't mean that I'm being efficient. It simply means that I'm spending money in one place and not in another. And so that doesn't help either the donor who wants their money to go to something good. It doesn't help the beneficiary whom we're trying to serve, and it doesn't help the organization actually improve and achieve that impact that they're trying to accomplish. So there are different ways of going about it, but it starts with this philosophical change that in some cases overhead, quote unquote overhead, is good. In some cases, we need to focus on what it takes, whether overhead or frontline staff or whatever, that will make that difference in society.
Yeah. Well, interesting discussion, and I would enjoy visiting with you about that fine point for another 3 hours, but our time is limited. Let me just ask you a couple of quick personal questions. I hope we can get some quick responses from you. But first, you've really become a leader in this space. You're a role model to many. Who do you look up to as a role model?
Well, that's a hard question in some ways, because there are so many great people in this space who are doing some remarkable things. But the one that comes to mind is a fellow named Magnus MacFarlane Barrow. He's a Scot. And he leads an organization called Mary's Meals. Mary's Meals now is serving 1 million children every single day and provides meals in their education, in their schools, so that they actually can go to school and so they can pay attention and do better in school. So imagine serving 1 million children a day. Magnus has received incredible accolades. He's been honored by popes and presidents and prime ministers. He was named a Time 100 Person of the Year last year and a CNN hero. And none of that is why I really admire Magnus. In fact, it's despite all of that. One of the things that I admire about Magnus is that he is so humble. I remember our first meeting in the Highlands of Scotland around a rickety table inside a very rickety shed, which is where he still does his work even after traveling the globe and working for 20 years in this space. Because he stays so grounded, he's not caught up in what's happening to him or even the organization, because he's so focused on the people he's trying to serve. And he's just absolutely committed to that. And the other reason I really admire Magnus is that while he did begin with this pure passion, just a desire to make a difference in any way he could, and that's guided and led and helped the organization over many years, over time, he's become much more thoughtful and sophisticated along the lines of strategy and planning and measurement and investments and other kinds of things that we've been talking about. And he's found a way to balance both those head issues and those heart issues in a remarkable way. And it's served him well, and more importantly, it's spurring the growth and impact that he's having for millions of kids.
That's great. One last question here. Can you give us an impact hack, some tip, some final tip, a bonus tip to help us do more good in the world?
Well, part of the challenge of that question is it sort of makes it seem as if it's easy to make a difference in this space, and it's not. We all know that. If social change were easy, then it would have been done. If there were incentives to make it happen, it would have been done. But there are a couple of guiding principles that I think about a lot. One is, whatever you're doing, whenever you can, step back and say, wait a minute, what is it that I'm trying to achieve? And think about that in terms of not teaching more kids or serving more of the homeless, but rather, what is the change that I want to see in the lives of those people, or in my community, or in society at large? What is the change I want to see? That's the impact, and orienting all discussions around that. And then the second one quickly is not to be afraid of data. Data is your friend. It can be very helpful. It can help you achieve those things that your heart's pushing you to do in the first place. Just because it's analytical or quantitative or complicated doesn't mean that it's something that won't be helpful, in fact. And there are many ways to harness the power of that.
That's great. Well, Jacob, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Before you go, tell people how they can connect with you on social media and otherwise.
Well, great. My Twitter handle is @Jacob_Allen, ALLEN 1, or you can follow Cicero Social Impact at Cicero Impact. So would love to connect with anybody and welcome your thoughts and feedback.
Fantastic. Well, again, Jacob, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. And we wish you every success in your work in making the world a better place.
Thank you very much, Devin. And thanks again to your audience, and best wishes in all you're doing.
Thank you. Let's do some good.